Grace and peace to you, Christ Community family. I hope and pray you're healthy and well as we come together on this second week of July for our Wednesday's Word, our midweek devotionals. We continue our theology series, and I'll be reading from Psalm 51, verse 6 through 10, before I share the second part of these reflections on the doctrine of sin. Psalm 51, verse 6, Behold, you delight in truth in the inward being, and you teach me wisdom in the secret heart. Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones that ye have broken rejoice. Hide your face from my sins and blot out all my iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Amen. Now, sin has tainted our world. Sin has tainted much of our daily lives. Sin has tainted our thoughts, our words, our actions. And oftentimes we forget how dangerous sin is. We forget how easy it is to sin. Sin should disturb us. Yet if you look in the world, it doesn't seem like sin is disturbing us at all. The more we ignore or minimize the depth and gravity of sin, the more we are devaluing the rescue of God's redeeming and reconciling grace. You see, the more we recognize and confess how much sin impacts our lives, the more beautiful God's redeeming love can be. So when you talk about sin, you can't just talk about behavior. You have to talk about the heart. You have to talk about the matter of the heart, because sin is in fact a problem of the heart. One's behavior, words, and attitude all come from the heart. When you talk about the doctrine of sin, you need to also talk about the theology of the heart. Because sinning is not just breaking a set of rules and that's it. Think about it. The psalm that we just read from the psalmist David, he's confessing his sins. To confess his sins without talking about his heart was impossible. That's why David knew and he understood that the root of his problem came from where his thoughts and his desires of his heart were. Which is why David is pleading and crying out for a cleansing of his heart. Because David knew that sin doesn't come from situations, it comes from the heart. Sin has the power to be deceptive. Sin has the power to blind. Sin has the power to even lead you into unbelief and hardening of your hearts. Let me read a couple more verses that continue to hammer down this point. Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 9. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? Genesis chapter 6, verse 5. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. Sin is addictive and powerful. Sin can distort and redirect our desires. One commentary puts it this way: sinful human conflict is rooted in spiritual adultery. And that's why we need to look into our heart to see if God is in our heart or not. That's why we need to see if we are inserting our thoughts, our desires in our heart and covering it up, so that rather than placing God's hearts and desires in our heart. You see, when you're in conflict, sometimes you have to think twice, because it may not be about the other person. It may be a reminder to look directly at your heart. It's a fact that we live in a time where the world is groaning and crying for something. The world is searching for answers. We live in a time in our world where there is a spiritual war going on, not only within us, but among us and around us. Brokenness is all around us because too many people are trying to solve problems without taking the time to understand why we have these problems. The reason why we need to understand this doctrine of sin is so that we can see how necessary the death and resurrection of Jesus is. The reason why we need to understand this theology of sin is because we need to relearn over and over again how our heart is at the root of all of this. You're not going to find any answers in a philosophy book, a theology book, a psychology book, or in any worldly built system or institution. It's the heart That's the root of it all. So I pray, church, this week that you take the time to reflect on your heart. Discern where your heart is. And if you need to recalibrate your heart back to the center of Christ, I pray that you do that this week. I hope you all have a blessed week.